Isaiah chapter 51. Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in days of old, the generations of long ago. Was it not you who cut Rahab in pieces and pierced the dragon? Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the deep, great deep, who made the depths of the sea a way for the redeemed to pass over? And the ransom of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. I am he who comforts you. You, who are you that you are afraid of man who dies, of the Son of Man who is made like grass, and have forgotten the Lord your Maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth. And you fear continually all the day because of the wrath of the oppressor, when he sets himself to destroy. And where is the wrath of the oppressor? He who is bowed down shall speedily be released. He shall not die and go down to the pit, neither shall his bread be lacking. I am the Lord your God, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. And I put my words in your mouth and covered you in the shadow of my hand, establishing the heavens and laying the foundations of the earth, and saying to Zion, you are my people. This is the word of the Lord. The epistle is from Colossians, beginning with chapter 1. And so, from the day we heard, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. May you be strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, for all endurance and patience with joy, giving thanks to the Father, who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. This is the word of the Lord. The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 9th chapter. While Jesus was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler came in and knelt before him, saying, my daughter has just died, but come and lay your hands on her, and she will live. And Jesus rose and followed him with his disciples. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up to him and touched the fringe of his garment. For she said to herself, I only touch his garment, I will be made well. Jesus turned, and seeing her, he said, take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. And instantly the woman was made well. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house, he saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion. He said, go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and he took her by the hand, and the girl arose. And the report of this went out through all that district. This is the gospel of the Lord. Anyways, the text for today's sermon comes from our gospel reading from Matthew chapter 9. And we're going to focus specifically on the last part, verses 23 to 26. And it says, Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion. He said, go away, for the girl is not dead but sleeping. And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and he took her by the hand, and the girl arose. And the report of this went out through all the district. Grace, mercy, and peace to you from God our Father, and from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. I like trivia. Trivia nights in St. Louis are one of my favorite ways to spend a night with friends. I think the reason that I like it so much is because I have so much interesting but absolutely useless knowledge in my head. And for Tuesday nights, for about an hour at Duffy's Pub and Grill in St. Louis, I am the master of all things trivial. I know stuff that no human being should know. Let me give you an example of a little bit of my trivial mastery here. Did you know, for example, that astronauts cannot burp in space? Did you know that the invention of the can opener came 48 years after the invention of the can? Did you know that there's actually more fake flamingos in the world than real flamingos? And did you know that Saudi Arabia, the nation of Saudi Arabia in the desert now, imports most of their camels from Australia? I thought that was pretty ridiculous. And then this one's kind of a personal favorite of mine as a Cardinals fan. It's kind of more of a collection of items. It's things that happened since the last time the Cubs won the World Series. So, lollipops didn't exist yet. The Ottoman Empire still existed though. Alaska and Hawaii hadn't attained statehood yet, and neither did Arizona, and neither did New Mexico. It's quite a long time ago. So these facts might seem kind of dumb or silly, and they are, I'll admit it, but each one of these facts is, in fact, a fact. They're true. They're objectively true. You can go look them up on the internet right now. Please don't. Finish the sermon first, but later this afternoon, if you want to look these things up, you can find them on Google or wherever. They're superficial. They may be even a bit ridiculous, but that doesn't change the fact that they are 100% true. And to me, it's kind of funny how many things you can look at and you can see are 100% true, but when you hear them for the first time, they're absolutely ridiculous. In the gospel reading for today, we see an unfortunate fact occur. Jairus' daughter, the synagogue ruler's daughter, was dead. She was scientifically, discernibly, objectively deceased. She had stopped breathing. She was old and pale. This was a fact. It was an objective truth that the people at Jairus' house knew, and they were coping with this fact when Jesus arrived on the scene. Now, it helps me to get a better understanding of this text and the impact that it has, and I really think of the setting. So let's talk about it for just a second. Jesus came up, he saw, the text says, he saw flute players and a crowd making a commotion. The Mark account of the same event says there was a commotion, a people weeping and wailing loudly. And the Luke account says they were all weeping and mourning for her. The people of this town, they were unified in their utter despondency over this girl's death. They were horribly upset and depressed over this. Now, in this scene of despair and sadness, Jesus comes in. And he doesn't do what we expect him to do. He doesn't go up to the crowd and console them for their loss. He doesn't offer words of counseling and comfort to Jairus and his family for the loss of their daughter. He doesn't do anything that we might consider to be the good Christian thing to do. Instead, Jesus comes up and he says, "Go away. The girl is not dead, but sleeping." Huh? Gee, what would you say if you were in that same scenario? If Jesus came up to you after your daughter had just died and said, "She's not dead, she's sleeping." Well, I think I would say, Jesus, the girl is dead. She's in that house right now. Cold, pale, stiff as a board. She hasn't breathed in over 3 hours. She's most certainly not sleeping. She's dead. And Jesus, please be respectful of the dead. But Jesus just says, go away. The girl is not dead, she's sleeping. And the crowd can't even muster a reply. You read the text, it says that their response isn't even verbal. They just laugh at him. They laugh at him right in his face out loud. They laugh at him with ridicule in their eyes. They laugh at him. To them, what Jesus said was so ridiculous that they drop every indication of sadness and mourning. And they laugh at Jesus. You see, to the crowd, what Jesus had said was laughable. It was ridiculous. In the midst of the darkness and the death of this world, Jesus and what he has to say just seem ridiculous. Given the circumstances that occurred in Paris, France, this Friday night, when a group of radical Islamic jihadists killed over 150 people, we might be able to identify a bit with the crowd from our narrative. We might look at this attack on the city of Paris, and we might have a certain reaction. I don't want to get too much into the details of what happened at this event. All you have to do is turn on your TV or go on your Facebook page, and you'll get more details than you need about what happened. All the details aren't even in yet. So anything that we do have is mostly just speculation. But I do want to talk about what this tragedy means for us today at Bethel Lutheran Church in Fort Smith, Arkansas. There are many ways we could respond to this tragedy. We have a choice. We could struggle really hard trying to figure out all the details of this tragedy, trying to find out the why and the hows of it, and the who and the how many were affected by this tragedy. We could choose to politicize this event and say, oh, our government's not doing enough to protect civilians from this threat of Islamic terrorism. We could come over here and we could say, I'm furiously mad, and I want vengeance, and I want justice on those who perpetrate these heinous acts. Or we could come even further, and we could weep, and we could mourn for the loss of those who died. And we could cause a commotion, like the crowd, in our weeping and our mourning. All of these things, given the circumstances, would be rational things to do. We're human beings. We have emotions. We have feelings. And these responses reflect those emotions. When evil things happen in the world, we make choices. We can react in certain ways. When death comes, we want two things. We want answers and we want action. But this isn't how Jesus approaches the darkness of death. He does something seemingly less rational and seemingly more ridiculous. He makes the choice to shine light into the darkness. John chapter 1, verses 4 and 5 say of Jesus, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The darkness will not overcome the light. There's an alternative translation. If you look at the original Greek, that says, the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not comprehended it. There's two ways you can read this word that's used in the Greek. It's more of a translation meaning grasped. So the light shined into the darkness, but the darkness has not grasped the light. And this can kind of mean two different things. It can mean grasp, like grasp to overpower and overcome the light, or it can mean grasp as in grasping the light as a concept. There's actually some very smart theologians and biblical scholars that imply that when John wrote his gospel, he actually meant for this word to have a dual meaning, to kind of have the same correlation both ways. So the darkness cannot overcome or even understand the light. The darkness of this sinful world in a deaf and sinful world cannot overcome or even understand the light of Christ. It's befuddling to them. It's a foreign concept to the darkness. Jesus is a foreign concept. To darkness in the midst of this world, Jesus and what he has to say seem ridiculous. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a famous quote on how to handle darkness in the world. He said this: "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can drive out hate." Light driving out darkness. Love driving out hate. Does any of this sound familiar? We just read John 1, and I think Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. knew John pretty well. I think he knew that Jesus was the light. And I think he understood the reason why Jesus said to turn the other cheek, to pray for our enemies, and to love them. At first glance, these responses to tragedy, to love your neighbor, to pray for them, to turn the other cheek, they just seem ridiculous. Why, if someone smacked me really hard in the right side of the face, why would I give them the left side of my face? It doesn't make sense. It's not rational. Why would I pray for an Islamic jihadist who just killed 150 people and pray for his forgiveness? That's not a rational response. But Jesus doesn't command us to act rationally. He commands us to act lovingly. Now, Jesus doesn't tell us that we should just kowtow and bow down and flee in terror from these things. He's not telling us that it's our responsibility to give in to these things. It's quite the opposite. In fact, if you look at it, he calls us to love our enemies. How do we do that, though? Well, let's look at what Jesus did when he had to face violent persecution. What did he do when they arrested him unjustly? What did they do when they beat him savagely? What did he do when they nailed him to a cross? Did he threaten violence against them? Did he call for God to bring down righteous justice from heaven against them? That would have been the rational thing to do. By all means, that would have been only just and fair. He was an innocent man. He was being unjustly persecuted. He could have done those things. But no, he didn't seek retribution. Instead, what did Jesus do? When they nailed his hands into the cross, he prayed for them. He said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." That's ridiculous. This is not the response of a rational person. It doesn't make sense to us. But this shows precisely why Jesus' response, which may first seem irrational and ridiculous, is actually right. And why our impulsive responses in the face of tragedy are often wrong. Praying for our enemies and turning the other cheek doesn't show cowardice or weakness in the face of troubles. It actually shows quite the opposite. It shows extreme strength and courage. If we were to join for the cry of more violence to be met out against those who persecute us, we would be trying to drive out darkness with darkness, when only light can do that. And if we tried to seek vengeance against those who perpetrated this attack in Paris, we would be trying to drive out hate with hate, when only love can do that. Jesus commands us to love and to pray for our enemies, not because we are afraid of them, and not because we have a position of weakness, but because we have a position of strength. And he knows that only something so ridiculous as love can make people change their minds and their hearts. This is why his seemingly ridiculous message is so important and powerful. The message matters. To people who have not heard the message and the good news of Christ, those people who are hurting and dismayed, this message matters. And we need to get it to them. And even though these people that we're giving the message to might be the very people who seek to harm us. We need to give it to them. That's what being a Christian in this sinful world is all about. Jesus claims us. He purchased us on the cross as his own. And we take on the moniker Christian. And Jesus calls Christians to reflect his light into a darkened world. A world full of enemies who seek to do us harm. This world which is experiencing so much darkness and death, it needs desperately to hear about the good news of Christ, to hear about the light. Jesus is life in the midst of death. He is light in the midst of darkness. He is life in the midst of death. He is the only thing that can change our minds and our souls. Now, we stopped short with the story of Jairus' daughter, and I don't want to end with where we left off. So let's continue that story. Jairus' daughter was dead. Discernibly, objectively, truthfully deceased. And Jesus comes in and he says what? He says, "Go away." But then in verse 25, we see what happened. Verse 25 is one of the most, in my opinion, at least, my humble opinion, one of the most underwhelming verses in the Scriptures. It says very briefly, Jesus goes in, he takes the girl by the hand, and the girl arose. That's it. There's no sweeping nuance. We get a 13-word sentence with no words longer than 8 letters long about how Jesus performed his first resurrection miracle in his ministry. Come on, Matthew! This is Jesus' first resurrection from the dead. This kind of thing doesn't just happen every day. Where's the flair? Where's the glitz? Where's the glamour? Why can't we have some big flowery sentence that's 100 words long talking about all the ins and outs and the details and the colors of the pots and the colors of things? Come on, Matthew. This is a miracle. But the more I kind of thought about this text when I was preparing for the sermon, the more I realized it was probably a very low-key thing. There wasn't much glitz. There wasn't much glamour. Jesus just says, "Go away." She's asleep. He walks in, grabs the girl's hand, and wakes her up. It's that simple. Think about this for a second. For Jesus, raising someone from the dead, raising you and I, for those who have gone before us, raising them from the dead is as easy as waking someone up in a Sunday afternoon nap. Just like that. That's kind of ridiculous. But it's also kind of comforting to know that we have a Lord, a God, for whom resurrection from the dead is as simple as taking your hand and waking you up. We see all around us darkness. And where we see darkness, Jesus brings light. Where we see hate, Jesus brings love. Where we see death, Jesus brings life. For Christians, death has no more dominion. Darkness has no more dominion. And hate has no more dominion over us. Jesus is the light which shines into the darkness, and the darkness can never overcome it.